Hey, welcome to my channel. My name is Christina Kent and I'm an oil painter based out of San Francisco. And today I'm going to walk you through the process of doing a color study for one of my landscape paintings. And if you haven't heard of a color study before, it's just a term for a quick sketch in color that tries to get down the main colors of an image. And these are usually pretty fast, loose sketches, so we're not so concerned with details or getting all the shapes exactly right. The important part is getting the colors right. And I do color studies for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because I'm planning to do a larger painting and I want to work out the colors in my medium before I put them on a larger canvas. So color studies, because they're these small sketches, they're kind of low investment. And if the colors don't work out, I can fix those issues before moving to a bigger canvas. But other times I do color studies just for themselves. Maybe I see a painting of another artist that I really like, or I see an image that maybe I don't want to make a full painting of it, but there's something I like about it that I want to get the colors down. In those cases, I'll do a color study and just leave it at that, leave it as a small sketch. I also find color studies are really useful if you're feeling rusty. Maybe you're a little intimidated about doing a big painting. You can instead just do a quick color study to kind of loosen up, get back to using the brush and mixing colors, and it's just kind of a low stakes way to get back into painting. As a quick note, this video isn't sponsored by anyone, but if you'd like to help me out, you can purchase one of my paintings on my website or support me on Patreon, or you can share this video with a friend. It really helps my channel. And I hope that whether you are new to painting or you've been painting for a long time, after seeing this video, you'll realize that color studies are a nice exercise that you can add to your creative practice. All right, let's get to it.
So here's the reference we're going to be using. It's based on a photo I took on a recent trip to Ireland, and I just really loved the big sky with the billowy clouds over this beautiful sort of idyllic green field. So I want to try to capture those feelings in the color study that I do today. And so here's my setup, and I actually did a value study of this landscape before going into the color study. So here you can see it off to the side, and there I was just grouping where the light colors were, the medium colors, and the dark colors. I'm painting on Arches oil paper, which I have toned burnt sienna colors. That's the orange that we're seeing. That has dried, and then I've just marked some light pencil lines on where I'm seeing some of the big shapes. And I'm working with a limited palette, so I have Naples yellow, titanium white, cadmium yellow, cadmium red, alizarin crimson, ultramarine blue, and cobalt teal. So those are the colors that I'm going to be working with. Also, I'm working on a pretty small sized piece of paper. I think it's 4 inches by 4 inches, and I'm working with a relatively large brush. So this is going to help me just focus on the big shapes and not get too much into the detail. And so I start by putting in some of my dark shapes. So I start with the dark tree forms and kind of the lines that separate the fields. And some people have different perspectives. Some people like to start with the things furthest in the background. And then, of course, my painting falls down because I did not put enough tape on it, so I add a little bit more to the back. But yeah, as I was saying, you can start with the darker shapes. Some people also like to start with the most saturated colors that they see, and especially if there's a lot of grays in the image, those can be the easiest to identify, so that can also be a good strategy. But for this one, I'm starting with the dark shapes, and as you can see, I'm just blocking them in with very broad strokes. I'm keeping the shapes of the colors pretty geometric and not getting into the details of the small trees too much, just trying to get the overall shape. I'm using a lot of, I was seeing kind of this very deep dark color in the trees, and I knew it was green, but it also felt a little purpley to me. So I'm also using in addition to the ultramarine blue, I'm also mixing in some of the alizarin crimson to get that really dark color. And then when I go in with the fields, then I'm bringing out a sort of brighter, lighter green. But I don't want to make it too light because I know I don't want it to compete with the lighter values in the sky. I really want the sky to stand out from the earth below. So I'm going to keep all of the values and colors sort of darker in the lower part of the image. So I'm keeping that in mind when I'm mixing the green. I want it to be bright and chromatic because these are very, fields that are very lush and very green from lots of rain. So I want to have that effect of these like vibrant, thriving fields, but at the same time, I don't want to use a super, super light green to convey that effect. So I keep it pretty dark and I keep it fairly neutral. The other advantage to working small is that you can cover the canvas with paint really quickly. So you can see, you don't have to spend much time mixing colors or putting them onto the canvas. You can kind of quickly lay the colors down and see how the overall effect is going to look. So that's another reason why I like to work really small for these studies. And once again, with the fields, as it was with the trees, I'm keeping the shapes really simple, really just trying to focus on the color relationships rather than the details that are in the scene. Next, I start to mix my colors for the sky, and the sky is the part that I'm really the most excited about for this image because we have some really, really cool clouds going on. And so I want to highlight that. I want that to shine. And in my value study, I simplified the sky mostly just to two values, so one large gray area and then one light area where the highlights are. For this color study, I thought I would try to keep the values similar to in the value study, so still have like one large gray area and then a white area, but within the gray area I thought I would add some more variation. So kind of if you squint your eyes and you look at the sky, you can see there's kind of this large gray mass and then the large white highlight, but then within the gray mass there's varying levels of grays, and there's also the blue that's popping out. So first, since the blue was the most obvious color, I first mixed the blue and started laying that into the sky. So I get this nice sort of pretty saturated blue with my cobalt teal, some ultramarine, and white. And that gives me this nice saturated blue that's going to give a pop of saturation in the image compared to the more grayed and muted colors. And I often like to do this in an image as well. If I'm going to have one area where there's very high saturation, then I like to have the other areas a little bit more muted so that it makes those saturated colors really stand out. So then the next color that I mix is sort of a purpley gray hue for the other parts of like the clouds that are in shadow. And so for this, I'm adding some of the alizarin crimson. I'm trying to also dull it a little bit so it's not so saturated. So I'm not mixing a bright purple, but really trying to get a more purpley gray. And that's the color that I'm using for most of my masses. Now, as I was painting this, I realized it did seem like it would be a little boring if I just used that same value of gray for all of the clouds. So I decided to add a little bit more nuance to this gray section. So I'm going in and putting a little bit more white into the mixture to highlight the fact that some of these clouds, even though they're kind of in shadow, they are getting hit by a little bit more light than other parts of the clouds. And I think that that can add a little bit more drama to the image and this feeling of these heavy storm clouds that are hovering over the landscape. But overall, I'm still trying to keep the values very similar, and instead what I'm doing is I'm gradually shifting some of the hues of the colors. So some areas I'm shifting a little bit towards blue in the mixture, and then other areas I'm shifting a little bit towards purple. So you're not getting so much of a light and dark contrast, but you are getting a contrast in the hues of the colors. And I think that is going to make the painting a little bit more interesting and give it more depth without breaking up the overall design of the painting in terms of light and dark shapes. As I go in towards the bottom of these cloud masses, I do add in a little bit of darker valued sort of purpley gray color, but I try not to make it too much darker. I once again, I don't want the gray of the clouds to be darker than the dark landscape underneath. I want them to stand out in contrast from one another. So I want the dark fields that are in the shadow of the clouds to remain darker than the clouds themselves. And here I think it's also important to note that I'm kind of making a lot of things up as I go. I'm looking at the overall feeling, the overall impression of the clouds, but I'm not copying exactly what I'm seeing in the clouds. I'm just trying to get some sort of general shapes and designs based on the way the clouds are looking. And here is where I think things can get really, really fun and really interesting, because these decisions of making where one cloud shape ends and another cloud shape begins. It's really subjective, and it's just something that you learn more about as you experiment and as you try different things. I could probably do, 5 color studies of these clouds and make different decisions and portray things in slightly different ways in each one. And all of those decisions will have an effect on the image, and all of those could create different and beautiful paintings. So I think another great thing with these color studies is that it really does give us room to experiment and try different things. I think sometimes as painters, it's easy to be scared about taking a risk, especially if you're spending, many, many hours on a painting. You might not want to risk messing it up. But if you're just doing a small study like this, this is the perfect time for you to take risks and try something that you think might not work, because if you do, it's okay. It's just a little experiment. And at this point, I have basically all of the clouds blocked in. So the last thing that remains is just adding the clouds that are in highlight. And here, as I'm laying in this the titanium white, mixed with a little bit of Naples yellow, so it's kind of a warm highlight, you can really see how it's popping out against the other colors in the image. So as you can see, in the end, we have a really simple representation of the reference photo. We took it and broke it down into just pretty simple shapes and tried out some different colors. I think the color study came out nice. One thing that became apparent to me in looking at this color study was, I think for a larger painting, I would like to change the colors of the landscape and even of the clouds in shadow to be more on the blue side. I want to bring out some more of the cool colors in the landscape and in the clouds and shades, so that the warmth of the cloud that's being hit by the sun really stands out. I think there's so much about painting that we can only learn from the act of painting itself and from actually seeing the paint on the canvas, and color studies are just such a good way to do that.
Thank you so much for watching, and as always, a huge shout out to my supporters on Patreon. Thank you so much for supporting these videos. If you like my videos and you like my art and you want to help me make more, check out my Patreon at the link below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time.